Thank you, dear Chair, dear members of the committee. Appearing before you, before the European Parliament, is both a privilege and an honor. It is above all a responsibility towards you and through you, towards the millions of European citizens that you represent. For the Republic of Cyprus, for this presidency, the European Parliament is our institutional partner. It's the source of legitimacy for our Union, and it is also the compass for the European project. The pluralism of our values and the plurality of our opinions are best manifested in this House, and we are never to be apologetic about them. It is with this approach that I appear before you today with my good friend and even better colleague, the Deputy Minister for European Affairs. Our aim is to present the priorities of the Cyprus presidency from the geopolitical perspective, as well as an exegesis for our approach. We are living in an era of transformation, with a growing number of interconnected, escalating and impactful crises. Everything is incremental in its effect, everything is political, and there is no business as usual, far from it. This is now our reality, and we have the obligation to take the world as it is. This is not the desperation of the cynic, but is rather the pragmatism of the concerned, the one, like our Union, that must be committed to principle while also showing principled commitment. In this context, under the motto, an autonomous Union open to the world, our presidency has a clear-eyed view of the European autonomy. Autonomy is essential. It is not, though, about isolation. It means equipping the Union to protect its security, its borders, its citizens, and also reducing strategic dependencies. It also means building and enhancing partnerships. We must recalibrate our reflexes, sharpen our analysis, trust our geopolitical instincts, with more engagement, more presence, more activity, more mobility. I would now like to move to the specific. First, on Ukraine. For the Cypriot presidency, Ukraine remains our central priority. It's the litmus test for European values, the central parameter for European stability, the testing ground for European diplomacy. Sovereignty, territorial integrity, the inviolability of borders are under attack. Aggression, invasion, and occupation are at the core of what is happening, and Cyprus fully understands that. My country has been through this and is still suffering, despite being a member state of the European Union, from a country that remains a candidate for accession with a CFSP alignment of 4%. The Union's support to Ukraine will continue, including through sanctions and also through robust measures against circumvention. This will be our aim the next weeks, always in coordination with G7 and global partners. In December, the EU agreed to provide a 90 billion loan for the period 2026-27. We renew our readiness to facilitate a swift conclusion by April. Finally, the recent discussions in UAE represent an important development. I just returned from Abu Dhabi, and at this stage, there may be some room for cautious optimism. The second point I would like to make relates to the transatlantic relationship. We start from the premise that a robust and mutually beneficial transatlantic relation is important for our prosperity and security. This long-standing partnership should be preserved, protected, and preserved, especially during times of uncertainty. We argue for maintaining forward-looking engagement and constructive dialogue with the US, focusing on files where we converge, and we must create a positive agenda in parallel with more work on contentious issues. With honesty, firm standing in our core values, respect for our geopolitical potential, with confidence in our openness. We have followed with great concern the developments on Greenland. Our support to Denmark's sovereignty and territorial integrity is firm. Full solidarity to Denmark with full support of its approach on this matter. Third, in relation to Gaza, I've just met with the High Representative for Gaza. on the Board of Peace, Nikolai Mladenov, who provided me with an overview of how things will operationally unfold in the following weeks. We fully support all efforts for peace and for the stabilization of Gaza in accordance with UN Security Council Resolution 2803. We should engage in full coordination with the UN and based on international law. We cannot be just observers. Cyprus has done its part at the humanitarian front and will continue to try and do more. EU's options for doing so must be fully explored, with dialogue and openness, with strategic flexibility aiming for solution finding. Next point relates to the wider region of the Middle East, the Gulf, and the southern neighborhood. Cyprus is part of that regional setting. It's a closer EU member state to that region, not only because of geographical proximity, but also because of long-standing, deep relationships with all the countries involved. We can and will operate as a bridge. The EU has to be open to this region. The ongoing crises demand that in Syria, in Iran, in Gaza, in Yemen, in the Red Sea, in Lebanon. The fight against radicalism, the challenges of migration do not allow otherwise. At the same time, there is another reason for focusing on this region. The young population, the energy resources, the investment opportunities, the Gulf leadership in AI, the supply lanes and connectivity projects. Now is the time for steps forward. During our presidency, we will dedicate efforts for the rollout of the Pact of the Mediterranean. We aim to deliver through the action plan and by convening a high-level meeting in spring. We welcome the recent EU high-level visits to Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, and Egypt. And we must push for deepening cooperation with the Gulf and the GCC. The first EU-GCC summit in 2024 was a milestone. We must work towards concrete deliverables, including by hosting an informal EU-GCC energy ministerial. And we are exploring facilitating GCC-EU dialogue and contacts at ministerial level as an intermediary step, equally with the Arab League. We must also work more on progress on trade relations through strategic partnership agreements and free trade agreements. This will be in our mutual benefit, thus strengthening our autonomy by opening up to the Middle East and the Gulf region. The fifth point relates to Iran, another stark reminder of how crises are global and not local. Together with the IGRVP, we actively outreached regional partners, because the EU must be active and respectful of the views of those that are the stakeholders. Our approach must factor in the need for synthesis. Again, an EU open to the world, aspiring to exercise effective diplomacy. We express our full solidarity with the Iranian people. The value of human life is sacred. Respect for human rights, including the right to freedom of expression and peaceful assembly, form a pillar for the rules-based order. Next, on Syria, a close neighbor to Cyprus, one with which we share maritime borders. We support a sustainable recovery path for Syria in an inclusive manner. Our message to Damascus has been consistent: full respect to good neighborly relations. And that, of course, entails full respect to public international law, including UNCLOS, and safeguarding the rights of all Syrians in an inclusive manner, irrespective of religious or ethnic background. On the very recent developments, we call for the full implementation of the ceasefire agreement. For Cyprus, for Europe, Syria's stability is essential for the regional stability. It relates to migration, religious tolerance, radicalism. It relates to our European interests. And I'm confident that on all the preceding files, our European Union must do more. A few words on other geographical areas. The recent EU-India summit marks the successful conclusion of the EU-India Free Trade Agreement, as well as the signing of the India-EU Security and Defence Partnership. Cyprus has firmly supported both. Also, in our relations with India, we must work on initiatives such as the India-Middle East Corridor, IMEC. This is the future. Cyprus will actively engage with India at all levels during our presidency, and we have incorporated such efforts into our planning for the next few months. At the same time, our presidency will actively support the advancement of our strategic partnership with ASEAN, including with outreach in that direction in spring. On Latin America and the Caribbean, we'll continue building on high-level EU engagements, including through agreements with key partners such as Mexico, Chile, and the Mercosur area. On the latter, we note with full respect to the competences of the European Parliament the referral of the EU-Mercosur agreement to the Court of Justice of the EU. And we also recognize the agreement's strategic importance. On Western Balkans, we reaffirm that the region remains an area of strategic priority, one that affects Europe's security and stability. Full alignment of those countries with the CFSP remains key. And more broadly, this must apply to all candidate countries, without selective exceptionalism due to geopolitical presence or willingness to engage with those the EU refuses. Their value must not be at the expense of our self-worth. Dear Chair, dear members of the committee, as Presidency, building on our priorities, we will pursue an ambitious approach for a Europe that is active and not just reactive, guided by our times and our principles, with strategic foresight, and driven by the realization that everything is political. The EU must lead by example, and it must be an example of leadership. I now pass the floor to Deputy Minister Raouna, or rather to David, to pass on the floor to Deputy Minister. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister. Please, Madam.
Good morning.